September 1st, 1914. Martha, the last passenger pigeon on Earth, takes her final breath in a Cincinnati Zoo cage. A species that once numbered 3 billion, that could darken the American sky for hours, is now completely, irrevocably gone. Before Martha died in her cage, billions of her kind ruled the North American sky. The passenger pigeon was not rare. It was, by every measure we have, the most abundant bird species on the continent, perhaps the most abundant bird species the world has ever known. In 1810, naturalist Alexander Wilson observed a single flock near Iowa. He estimated at 2 billion birds. The flock took 3 hours to pass overhead. He called it one of those almost inconceivable multitudes. They moved through the forests like a living storm. The birds traveled in waves, their wing beats creating a sound witnesses compared to distant thunder. When they landed to feed on mast, acorns, chestnuts, beechnuts scattered across the forest floor, entire trees would disappear under the weight of their bodies. Branches snapped. The ground darkened with their droppings. They nested in colonies of staggering density. One 1,871 nesting site in Michigan stretched across 100,000 acres. An estimated 136 million birds occupied that single forest. For centuries, passenger pigeons were woven into the fabric of American life. Indigenous peoples hunted them. European settlers hunted them. The birds were cheap protein, abundant and easy to kill. They mattered because they were everywhere, because you could not escape them, could not imagine a sky without them, could not conceive of their absence. They ate the forest seeds and shaped its regeneration. They fed predators and scavengers. They were quite simply a foundation species of the eastern and midwestern wilderness. Then, in less than a century, they vanished completely. Not depleted, not endangered, extinct. 0 birds remain anywhere on Earth. How does a species numbering in the billions disappear in a single lifetime? The answer begins with a railroad, a new technology, and a hunger for cheap meat that would transform a continent. By 1870, the railroad had stitched America together. And that changed everything for the passenger pigeon. Suddenly, fresh meat could travel from forest to city in days instead of weeks. It stayed cold enough. It stayed fresh enough. It was cheap enough that working families could afford it. A single pigeon sold for pennies, sometimes less. Hunters saw opportunity. In 1880, a single game dealer in New York received over 18,000 passenger pigeons in 1 month alone. By the 1890s, the kill rate had climbed to an estimated 100 million birds per year. The birds weren't just hunted in ones and twos. Professional netters descended on nesting colonies with equipment designed to trap thousands at a time. They used decoys. They used noise. They used fire and smoke to panic birds into nets stretched across clearings. Between 1850 and 1900, the forests themselves were vanishing too. Timber companies cleared 100 million acres of eastern woodland for logging and agriculture. The pigeons needed these forests to roost, to nest, to survive. But the trees were falling faster than anyone was counting them. A naturalist named John James Audubon had warned, back in 1832, that the pigeons' numbers seemed limitless, but he was wrong about one thing. He assumed that abundance itself was a kind of protection, that no force on Earth could diminish such multitudes. He didn't account for what a railroad could do, or what hunger could drive men to do, or how quickly a species could vanish once both forces aimed at it together. By 1900, ornithologists began to notice something that should have alarmed the nation. Wild flocks were disappearing entirely from regions where they'd nested for centuries. In 1878, a single breeding colony in Michigan contained an estimated 136 million passenger pigeons. By 1900, there were none. The collapse was not gradual. It was a freefall. The railroads made it possible. As the Pennsylvania Railroad and the Michigan Central expanded their lines deeper into pigeon country, they brought with them thousands of professional hunters, men paid by the pound. In 1876, at Petoskey, Michigan, netters and shooters killed over 1.5 million birds in a single month from one roost. The birds were packed into barrels with salt, loaded onto freight cars, and shipped east to New York and Philadelphia, where they sold for pennies. A dozen pigeons cost less than a chicken. The forests fell at the same time. Between 1850 and 1910, the eastern hardwood forests that the pigeons depended on were clear-cut for farmland and timber. No trees meant no mast, the acorns and chestnuts the birds ate. No mast meant starvation. No starvation meant the birds' only option was to fly farther, searching for food in forests that were shrinking every year. By 1890, flocks that once darkened the sky for 3 days straight were reduced to scattered thousands. Sightings became rare enough to report in newspapers. In 1901, a hunter named Pike Fisher shot what is believed to be the last wild passenger pigeon near Sargent's, Ohio. No one knew it at the time. There was no ceremony, no final count. Just another dead bird, and then silence. The species did not end in the forest, though. It ended in a cage, under electric lights, watched by visitors who came to see the last of something that had once been infinite. And what happened to that final bird would become the most controversial death in American natural history. On September 1st, 1914, Martha died. She was alone in her cage at the Cincinnati Zoo, a female passenger pigeon roughly 29 years old. Her body was frozen solid and sent to the Smithsonian Institution in Washington, D.C., where it remains today, mounted, preserved, a taxidermied ghost. Martha's death created an immediate void that scientists scrambled to understand. The Biological Survey, led by Alexander Wetmore, began collecting accounts from hunters, trappers, and naturalists who had witnessed the species in its final decades. What they found was staggering. Between 1870 and 1890, an estimated 100 million passenger pigeons per year had been slaughtered, netted, shot, and poisoned for their bodies alone. Their wings and feathers were worthless. Only the meat mattered. William Hornaday, director of the New York Zoological Society, became the voice of ecological alarm. He published his findings in 1913, just months before Martha's death, calling the extinction the most astounding extermination of bird life in the history of our country. He was right. No other vertebrate species in recorded history had vanished so completely, so quickly, from billions to zero in barely a century. The loss triggered something unprecedented. Conservationists used the passenger pigeon as evidence that wildlife was not infinite, that extinction was real, that humans could erase an entire species through indifference and commerce. Museums across America created exhibitions. Schools taught children about Martha. She became a symbol, not of what was lost, but of what could still be saved. Yet in attics and museum vaults across the country, something unexpected remained: specimens. Hundreds of them. Shot and preserved before 1914, these dead pigeons would become the only physical proof that billions of living birds had ever existed at all, and they would soon reveal secrets about the species that no one had anticipated. The passenger pigeon left almost nothing behind. No bones in the soil. No nests in museums. No recordings of their calls. That sound is gone forever. What remains is fragmented. A handful of preserved skins in glass cases at the American Museum of Natural History in New York, the Smithsonian Institution in Washington, and a few other institutions worldwide. Fewer than 1,000 specimens survive from billions that once lived. In 2003, geneticist Beth Shapiro extracted DNA from one of those preserved birds at the Smithsonian. What she found upended decades of conservation theory. The genetic data showed Martha's lineage possessed normal diversity. Her death was not caused by inbreeding weakness, as scientists had long assumed. The species did not collapse because it had grown genetically fragile. It collapsed because humans killed it. Between 1850 and 1900, an estimated 3.7 billion passenger pigeons were shot, netted, and poisoned. No disease, no genetic doom, pure, overwhelming, industrial-scale slaughter. The railroad made extinction possible. The telegraph made it coordinated. Refrigeration made it profitable. One species, one human lifetime, erased by technology and appetite. We know this now because of what was preserved. Because scientists saved the bodies. Because someone, somewhere, had the foresight to keep the evidence. And yet there is one piece of the passenger pigeon puzzle that was never preserved. One thing that vanished entirely, leaving behind only written descriptions and a mystery that persists to this day. In just 114 years, humans had accomplished the impossible, the total erasure of a species that dominated an entire continent. Another file is already open, the story of how we learned too late to stop. Subscribe to the archive for more extinctions we could have prevented.